A lonely billionaire helps an injured homeless girl. When she shows him her toy, he freezes upon recognizing it as the same one from his childhood. The clock in Holden Marshall's office read nearly 11 at night when he finally closed his laptop. The Marshall Enterprises building was almost empty, with only a few dedicated employees still working on the lower floors. Holden grabbed his coat and took the private elevator down, giving a brief nod to the security guard in the lobby. "Good evening, Mr. Marshall." "Good evening, Frank." A gust of cold wind greeted him as the automatic doors slid open. New York in December was ruthless, but Holden appreciated the chilly air after hours spent locked in meetings. He decided to dismiss his driver and walk a few blocks to clear his mind. The streets of the financial district were nearly deserted. Holden's footsteps echoed on the sidewalks as he passed brightly lit storefronts and towering buildings. This was what his life had become: work, solitude, and the empty mansion he had inherited. At 37, Holden Marshall was one of the most successful businessmen in the city, and also one of the most isolated. It was when he turned a corner that he saw her, a small figure huddled against the wall of an alley, visibly trembling. Holden almost walked right by. New York had taught him not to get involved. But something made him stop. The girl couldn't have been more than 12. Her dark hair was tangled, and there was a suspicious stain on her sleeve that looked like blood. "Are you all right?" Holden asked, keeping his distance. The girl looked up at him, startled. Her eyes were wide, wary. "I'm fine. Just go away," she muttered, clutching something against her chest. Holden should have walked away. That's what any sensible person would do, but the wind blew harder, and he saw the girl shiver. "You're hurt," he observed, now clearly seeing the blood on her arm. "There's a hospital a couple of blocks from here." "I don't need help," she answered, but her weak voice betrayed her words. Holden hesitated. Getting involved with a street kid could bring complications his meticulously organized life didn't need. But leaving her out here, in the cold, with an open wound. "Look, let's just go to the ER. Then you can decide what you want to do," he offered, keeping his voice neutral. "I'll cover the bill." The girl studied him intently before finally nodding and struggling to her feet. That's when Holden saw what she was holding so carefully, a brown teddy bear, visibly worn from time and use, with a patch on its right arm and one eye hanging by a thread. Something inside Holden froze. That teddy bear. It was identical to the one his father had given him on the last birthday they spent together, weeks before the accident that took him. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his composure. "June," she answered simply, following him at a cautious distance. The ER was relatively quiet that night. A middle-aged nurse greeted them, eyeing Holden suspiciously before leading June to an exam room. The girl refused to let go of the teddy bear even when they needed to clean the wound on her arm. Sitting in the waiting room, Holden couldn't take his eyes off that object. Even from a distance, he could see the details: the slightly drooping left ear, the worn button nose, the small plaid patch on its chest. It was like looking at a ghost from his past. Teddy Bear Brownie, as Holden had called it, had been his companion after his father's death. For years, he slept with it every night, until he hit his teens and stored it in a box in the mansion's attic. As far as he knew, the bear should still be there, along with other memories he preferred to keep buried. Yet here was another, identical in every detail, in the arms of a girl he didn't know. The nurse came out of the exam room and approached him. The cut wasn't deep, but it needed a few stitches. "She's fine now." "Thank you," Holden replied automatically. "Did she say how she got hurt?" "No, she barely said a word." The nurse lowered her voice. "I'm going to have to call social services. She's a minor on her own, possibly homeless." The mention of social services snapped Holden out of his trance. He nodded. It was the right procedure. The girl would get help, go to a shelter or a foster home. It wasn't his problem. But the teddy bear. "Can I use your phone?" June asked suddenly, appearing at his side. Her arm was bandaged, and she still held the toy tightly. "Sure," Holden handed over his phone, noticing how small her fingers looked against the screen. June looked at the device, then at Holden. "I have no one to call." Those simple words carried a weight he felt in his own chest. He knew that feeling well. "Social services will help you," he said, more to convince himself than her. June just shrugged, her gaze returning to the teddy bear in her arms. "His name is Brownie." The name hit Holden like a punch. The same name he had given his teddy bear 25 years ago. With slightly trembling fingers, Holden took back his phone and dialed a number. "Keena, sorry to call so late." "Holden, it's almost midnight," came the sleepy voice of his lawyer and longtime friend. "I need your help. I'm at Memorial Hospital with a girl I found on the street." "My God, Holden. What have you done this time?" "Nothing. She was hurt. I just brought her in for treatment." He hesitated, glancing at June, who was now speaking softly to her teddy bear. "But something strange, Keena. She has a teddy bear identical to the one my father gave me before he died. Exactly the same, even down to the name." Silence on the other end of the line. "And what do you want me to do about that?" "I need to know if there's some legal way to find out more about her family, where that teddy bear came from." "Holden, whatever you're thinking, stop now. Let social services handle this. Coincidences happen." But as he watched June hugging her Brownie, Holden knew it wasn't a coincidence. There was a connection he couldn't explain, and for the first time in years, he felt he needed to understand. "It's important, Keena. Please." A defeated sigh sounded on the other end. "I'll see what I can do, but don't do anything stupid until we talk." Holden hung up, meeting June's gaze. The girl studied him with an intensity beyond her years, as if she too felt that their destinies had just become intertwined over a simple teddy bear. Keena arrived at the hospital an hour later, her face showing a mix of concern and annoyance. She found Holden sitting in the waiting room, watching June, who had fallen asleep in a chair, clutching the teddy bear tightly. "This is a terrible idea," Keena whispered, approaching. She was a practical woman, with short hair and impeccable suits, the result of years working in a male-dominated environment. "The social worker is on the way. Let the system take care of this." Holden kept his eyes on the sleeping girl. "I can't, Keena, because of a teddy bear." "Holden, this is crazy. It's not just the teddy bear." But he couldn't explain it. How could he put into words the feeling that had consumed him since seeing June in that alley? It was as if part of his past, which he believed buried, had resurfaced in the form of this child. "Social services will find a place for her. A proper place," Keena insisted. "A crowded shelter. Or a foster family only interested in the government check." Holden shook his head. "She's already been through enough." Keena crossed her arms. "And since when do you care so much about homeless kids? Last week, you didn't even want to approve that donation for the youth outreach program." The question hit Holden like a slap. It was true. So until yesterday, kids like June were just statistics in reports that crossed his desk. Faceless figures that, at most, served to improve the public image of his company when he made some strategic donation. "I can offer her a room in my home, just until we find out more about her family." "That's kidnapping, Holden. Not if she agrees. And if we do everything legally." Keena ran a hand through her hair, exasperated. "So you want me to forge temporary guardianship papers?" "No. I want you to use your contacts to expedite a legitimate process for provisional custody. In the meantime, we can look for her family." Before Keena could answer, June woke up, her eyes immediately focusing on the two adults who were talking. There was an instinctive distrust in her gaze, the kind that only develops after repeated disappointments. "You're deciding where you're sending me, aren't you?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Holden and Keena exchanged glances. Holden was the one who spoke. "Actually, I was thinking maybe you could stay at my house. Temporarily," he added, noticing Keena's warning look. "Until we find your family." June hugged the teddy bear to her chest. "I've been on my own for a while." "Why are you doing this?" Her direct question caught Holden off guard. June continued. "People like you don't help people like me without wanting something in return." "People like me? Rich, important." She shrugged. "I've seen your type before." Keena let out an exasperated sigh, but there was a hint of admiration in her eyes. The girl was perceptive. "Maybe I'm curious about your teddy bear," Holden finally admitted. "I had one just like it when I was a kid." June looked at Brownie, then back at Holden. That's weird. Yeah, it is. A silence settled between them, broken only when the nurse returned with discharge papers and news that the social worker would arrive in about 20 minutes. It was June who made the decision. All right. I'll go with you, she said to Holden, standing up, but only until I find somewhere better. 3 hours and many negotiations later, Keena had secured a provisional agreement with the social worker. Holden signed several documents committing to provide proper care for June, while an investigation into her family background was conducted. The fact that he was a prominent businessman with abundant resources and no criminal history helped overcome initial objections. It was nearly dawn when Holden's car finally passed through the gates of his property on the outskirts of New York. June kept her face pressed to the window, her eyes wide at the sight of the mansion emerging through the trees. You live here? Alone? She asked, incredulous. Yes. Holden felt slightly embarrassed. The Marshall mansion, with its 12 suites, indoor pool, private movie theater, and extensive gardens, suddenly seemed absurdly extravagant. It belonged to my family. The house was silent when they entered. Patricia, the housekeeper, wouldn't arrive for a few more hours, and the rest of the staff only worked during the day. I'll show you to your room, Holden said, guiding June up a marble staircase. He chose the room closest to his own, decorated in neutral tones. The bathroom is right there. If you need anything, I'm fine, June cut him off, still clutching the teddy bear. She looked tiny in the spacious bedroom with its king-size bed and elegant furniture. Right, well, good night, or good morning, really. Holden closed the door softly and headed to his own room. The sun was beginning to rise, bathing the mansion in a golden light that couldn't dispel the strangeness of the situation. What was he doing? How crazy was it to bring a complete stranger into his home? Lying in bed, unable to sleep, Holden thought about the teddy bear, about his father, about coincidences that didn't feel like coincidences. Eventually, he fell into a restless sleep. When he woke, it was already past noon. For a moment, he thought the whole thing had been a strange dream. Then he heard muffled voices coming from downstairs. He found Patricia in the kitchen, unsuccessfully trying to persuade June to eat something. Good afternoon, Mr. Marshall, the housekeeper said with obvious relief upon seeing him. I was explaining to the young lady that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. June sat at the kitchen table, looking even smaller in the daylight. Brownie rested on the seat beside her. I'm not hungry, she mumbled. You need to eat something, Holden insisted, sitting across from her. Then we can talk. June studied him for a long moment, before picking up a piece of toast and nibbling at the edge. The silence that followed was almost tangible. There were so many questions in the air, so many uncertainties, but neither seemed ready to ask them. Patricia moved around the kitchen, casting curious glances at the strange duo. Holden knew that by the end of the day, the entire staff would be speculating about the mysterious girl who'd suddenly appeared. Finally, it was June who broke the silence. What happens now? Such a simple question with a complicated answer. Holden realized that in his impulsiveness, he hadn't planned beyond bringing June home. What did happen now? School, clothes, rules. He had no idea how to care for a child. Now, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt, we find out where your teddy bear came from. After the quiet breakfast, Holden took June to the living room. The large picture window offered a view of the neatly kept gardens, now dusted with a thin layer of snow. June sat on the edge of the sofa as if ready to run at any moment. Brownie remained firmly in her arms. June, Holden began, choosing his words carefully. I need to ask you about the teddy bear. Where did it come from? The girl lowered her eyes to the worn toy, running her fingers over the familiar patches. My mom gave it to me, she finally replied. I've had it for as long as I can remember. She said Brownie had been with me since the day I was born. Holden felt a pang of disappointment. He had hoped for a more concrete revelation, something that explained the strange coincidence. And your mom? Where is she now? June pressed her lips together. I don't know. She left me at a shelter when I was 8. Said she'd come back in a few days. A bitter smile crossed her young face. That was 4 years ago. The directness of her response caught Holden off guard. 4 years waiting for someone who never returned. 4 years carrying a teddy bear as the only reminder of a home. "Do you know where she got the teddy bear?" June shook her head. "She never told me. Just said it was special, that I should take good care of it." Holden looked at the toy more closely. The similarity to his own brownie went beyond appearance. There was something about how the button eyes were sewn on, the peculiar shape of the ears. This wasn't a mass-produced teddy bear. It was handmade, crafted with care. "May I?" He held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, June handed over the teddy bear. It was the first time he'd seen her without it since they met. Holden turned the toy in his hands, examining every detail, the texture of the fabric, the stitching, all of it bringing back memories of his own childhood. When he turned the bear over, he noticed something on the faded label, nearly imperceptible embroidered initials. "HM," he murmured. "What?" June asked, leaning in to see. "These initials, HM, they're my initials, Holden Marshall." June frowned. Coincidence? Maybe. But Holden didn't believe that. He handed the teddy bear back to June, who immediately clutched it. "What's your mother's name?" Elisandra Caldwell." Holden made a mental note of the name. "And you were born where?" "Right here in New York. At Memorial Hospital, I think." "That's what it says on my birth certificate." The pieces were starting to come together in Holden's mind, although they still formed an incomplete picture. He picked up the phone. "I'm going to call my lawyer. She can help us track down your mom." June's eyes widened. "You're really going to look for her?" "I am. I promise." An hour later, Keena had all the available information about Elisandra Caldwell. The lawyer didn't hide her skepticism on the phone, but agreed to use her contacts to begin a discreet search. "And in the meantime," she asked Holden, "what are you going to do with a 12-year-old? Your meeting with the Japanese investors is tomorrow." Reality hit Holden like a bucket of cold water. His calendar was packed for the next few weeks. Conferences, board meetings, dinners with important clients. "I'll figure it out," he replied, before hanging up. When he returned to the living room, he found June examining the photographs on the shelf. There were only a few. His parents on their wedding day, Holden at his college graduation, his father handing him the keys to the company on his 25th birthday. "Is that your family?" June asked, pointing to an old photo. "Yes, my parents. My dad died when I was 13. My mom a few years later." June looked at him with an understanding beyond her years. "So you ended up alone too?" It wasn't a question. Holden just nodded. The following days tested Holden's ability to adapt. While trying to maintain his work routine, he had to completely reorganize his life. A series of phone calls resulted in a pile of new clothes for June, delivered the next morning. Patricia, recovering from the initial surprise, took on the responsibility of ensuring the girl ate properly. Keena appeared on the third day with enrollment forms for a private school nearby, which accepted June on an emergency basis thanks to a generous donation from Holden. "This is temporary," Keena reminded him as they filled out the documents in Holden's office. "Don't get attached to the girl." Holden pretended not to hear. Through the window, he could see June walking in the garden, Brownie held firmly in her arms. There was something about her that awakened a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. A routine slowly began to form. In the morning, Holden drove June to school before heading to the office. Patricia picked her up in the afternoon, and Holden tried to be home in time for dinner, something he rarely did before. The mansion, always silent and empty, now had a new energy. Small signs of June's presence appeared everywhere: a book left on the sofa, sneakers in the hallway, a half-finished glass of milk on the coffee table. Despite the routine, June remained cautious. Holden noticed that she never let Brownie out of her sight, as though she feared it might also disappear. At night, she checked multiple times to make sure her bedroom door was unlocked, ready for a quick escape if necessary. "Why do you do that?" Holden asked one night, after watching her test the doorknob for the third time. June shrugged. "Habit. At the shelter, they sometimes locked us in at night." The simplicity of her answer masked a story Holden could only imagine. How many places had June called home in the last 4 years? How many times had she woken up in an unfamiliar environment? 1 week after her arrival, Holden went to June's room to say goodnight and found her already asleep, hugging Brownie tightly. On the bedside table was a drawing, a simplified version of Holden, June, Bin, and the teddy bear, all holding hands in front of the mansion. Underneath, in careful letters, "Temporary home." The image stirred an unexpected emotion in Holden. Temporary. That was their arrangement. But with each passing day, the idea of June leaving became harder to imagine. At the office, Holden struggled to stay focused. His assistant noticed the distraction, the frequent phone calls to check on June, the early departures. The man who once lived for work now seemed to have other priorities. "Any news on Alessandra Caldwell?" he asked Kina one rainy afternoon, while they waited for June to finish a trial piano lesson. Kina shook her head. "Nothing concrete yet. She disappeared from the system about 3 years ago. Last known address was a women's shelter in Brooklyn. Keep looking." "Holden," Kina hesitated. "Do you really want to find her? What if she shows up and wants June back?" The question hit Holden unexpectedly. He hadn't considered that possibility. His search for the origin of the teddy bear had turned into something far more complex. "She has the right to know about her mother," he finally replied. That night, after dinner, June approached Holden in the office. For the first time since she arrived, Brownie wasn't with her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of this." Holden smiled. "You're welcome. Do you really think you'll find my mom?" The hope in June's voice was palpable. Despite being abandoned, she still wanted to believe. "We're trying," Holden replied honestly, "but in the meantime, you're safe here." June nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I know it's just temporary, but thank you anyway." Temporary. The word echoed in Holden's mind long after June had gone to bed. How could something as simple as finding a child with a familiar teddy bear have upended his life so completely in just a few days? Meanwhile, upstairs, June drifted off to sleep, hugging Brownie, her only link to a past that was slowly starting to reconnect. 2 weeks had passed since June's arrival. The Marshall mansion, once a place of silence and order, now buzzed with new energy. Every morning brought a small battle to get June to school on time. Every night, a negotiation about bedtime. Holden, accustomed to steering executives and closing multi-million-dollar deals, found himself utterly unprepared for the challenges of raising a preteen. Kina showed up on a rainy afternoon, carrying a thick folder under her arm. The look on her face said her news wasn't promising. "I started by checking the mansion's employee records," she explained, spreading documents over Holden's desk. "But it's a complete mess. It seems that before 2015 your family didn't keep formal records of the household staff. Many were paid in cash without contracts." Holden frowned. His father had always been meticulous with the company, but ran the household with surprising informality. "How many people worked here back then?" "Impossible to say for sure. I found payment receipts for around 8 fixed employees, gardeners, housekeepers, cooks, but there were also temps. People hired for events, renovations, vacation cover. The idea that Alessandra Caldwell, June's mother, might have worked at the mansion was unsettling. It could explain the origin of the teddy bear, but it opened up a whole new set of questions. "I'm going to need more time," Kina concluded. "And maybe you should talk to Patricia. She's been here how long? 20 years? 23, Holden corrected. "You're right. She might know something." After Kina left, Holden went to the mansion's basement. The place housed decades of Marshall family documents, letters, photo albums, journals. Most of the boxes had been sealed since his parents' deaths, untouched for years. Holden spent hours there, opening dusty boxes, leafing through yellowed documents. He found records of parties held at the mansion, birthday gift lists, even a diary of his mother's that he lacked the courage to open, but nothing about an employee named Alessandra. When he finally came back upstairs, it was past midnight. The house was quiet, but a faint light glowed from the kitchen. He found Patricia sitting at the table, sipping tea. The girl's asleep, the housekeeper informed him. She waited for you to have dinner but gave up eventually. Holden felt a twinge of guilt. I lost track of time. Patricia nodded, a gesture that carried years of silent understanding. She had witnessed Holden's childhood, his rebellious teenage years after his father's death, his transformation into the reserved businessman he'd become. Patricia, Holden began hesitantly, do you remember an employee named Alessandra Caldwell? She might have worked here around 12 years ago. The housekeeper frowned, thinking, Caldwell? I don't recall that surname. But we had so many girls working here over the years. What about someone who was pregnant? Do you remember any employee who was expecting a child? Patricia's eyes widened at the question. This is about the girl, isn't it? About June. Holden nodded. I think her mother might have worked here, and somehow she got a teddy bear identical to the one my father gave me. Patricia remained silent for a long moment. There was a young woman, she finally said. I don't remember her name. She was hired to organize the attic, cataloging old items. Your mother hired her temporarily. I think she was pregnant, yes. Holden's heart raced. When was that? Shortly before Mrs. Marshall fell ill, maybe early 2011. She didn't stay long. The timeline fit perfectly with June's age. Holden was about to ask more questions when a scream cut through the house's silence. He recognized June's voice immediately. He ran upstairs, heart pounding. June's bedroom door was ajar. She was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, hugging Brownie so tightly her knuckles were white. June? What happened? She looked at him, eyes wide as though she still saw something terrifying. I dreamed about her. My mom. Holden sat on the edge of the bed, unsure what to do. Do you want to tell me about it? June took a deep breath, trying to steady her sobs. She was leaving again, but this time she took Brownie with her. I ran, but I couldn't catch up. Without thinking, Holden wrapped an arm around June's shoulders. To his surprise, instead of pulling away, she leaned into him. It was just a dream, he murmured. Brownie is here. You're safe. They stayed like that for a few minutes until June's breathing calmed. Holden was about to stand when she spoke. Did you really have a teddy bear like Brownie? Yes, Holden smiled at the memory. My dad gave him to me on our last birthday together. I was 12, almost your age. What happened to him, to your dad? Holden rarely talked about that day. Though distant, the pain had never fully gone away. It was a car accident. He was coming back from a business trip, trying to get home in time for my party. The driver lost control on a curve during a storm. Holden paused. The last thing he gave me was that teddy bear. I didn't see him for 3 days before that. He was on a business trip. When he finally came back, and he brought Brownie. And your teddy bear, where is it now? Stored somewhere in the attic, I imagine. After I grew up, my mom boxed up a lot of my childhood stuff. June hugged her Brownie tighter. I'd never box mine up. I know, and that's why he's still protecting you. Holden smiled. Now think you can get back to sleep. June nodded, but as Holden stood up, she grabbed his hand. Can you stay a little longer? Just until I fall asleep. The request, so simple and so full of trust, moved Holden deeply. For the first time since she arrived, June showed vulnerability, a sign that maybe the walls she had built were beginning to crumble. Sure, he replied, sitting back down. June settled in, still holding Brownie, but now also lightly grasping Holden's hand. Within minutes, her breathing became slow and deep. Holden stayed there, watching her relaxed face as she slept. It was hard to believe that only 2 weeks ago, he had found her shivering in an alley. Now, somehow, she'd become part of his life. The next morning, Holden woke up determined. After dropping June at school, he drove to the warehouse where he kept the family's older items. Among furniture covered with sheets and wrapped paintings, he found several boxes with his name on them. He spent hours opening them one by one, sifting through memories, school uniforms, sports trophies, report cards. Finally, in a box simply labeled HM Personal, he found what he was looking for. The teddy bear was exactly as he remembered. Black button eyes, a plaid patch on the chest, the initials HM on the label. The resemblance to June's Brownie was undeniable, down to the smallest detail. It couldn't be a coincidence. When he returned to the mansion, he found an urgent message from Keena. "I found something. Come to my office at 3 p.m. today." His heart pounded. A real lead at last. But after the board meeting that morning, Holden felt only a weight on his shoulders. While on his way to see Keena, he got summoned to an emergency meeting with the company's board of directors. The top-floor boardroom of Marshall Enterprises was silent as Holden entered. 7 faces turned to him, all displaying the same thinly veiled disapproval. The entire board had been called in for an emergency session, something that hadn't happened since the 2020 financial crisis. Holden, Gerald Winters, the board chairman and longtime friend of his father, was the first to speak. "Thank you for squeezing us into your apparently ever busier schedule." The ironic tone did not go unnoticed. Holden took his seat at the head of the table, aware of every stare locked on him. "Ladies and gentlemen, what's so urgent that we have to interrupt the development of our Asian project?" Victoria Chen, the youngest board member and head of public relations, slid a folder toward him. "This for starters." The folder contained gossip column clippings and blog prints. All mentioned the same thing: Holden Marshall, New York's most eligible bachelor, spotted with a mysterious child in recent days. The speculation ranged from a secret daughter to youth mentorship programs. "My personal life is not a matter for this board," Holden replied, closing the folder. Gerald leaned forward. "It becomes our concern when it affects the company. You've cancelled 3 important meetings in the last 2 weeks. You walked out in the middle of the Japanese investors' presentation, and we just learned you approved a $2 million donation to a social housing program without consulting the Corporate Responsibility Committee. I'm the CEO of this company, Gerald. I have the autonomy to—" "You have autonomy as long as shareholders trust your judgment," Margaret Osley, who represented the minority shareholders, interrupted. "And that trust is being shaken by your recent behavior." Holden looked around the table. He had known each of these faces for years. Most had worked with his father, witnessed Holden's rise in the company after his father's death. They always respected him, even when they disagreed with his decisions. "What exactly are we talking about here?" he asked directly. Philip Greaves, the CFO, responded. "We're talking about the girl, Holden. Who is she? Why is she suddenly living in your house? And more importantly, what's the impact on the company?" Holden felt his face grow hot. The idea that they had investigated June infuriated him. "Her name is June. She's under my temporary care while we try to locate her family. And no, she's not my daughter, nor part of some PR stunt." He paused. "And frankly, I don't see how this affects my ability to run this company." Victoria cleared her throat. "Holden, you have to understand our concern. Marshall Enterprises has an image to uphold. Rumors can affect the stock price, especially with the upcoming IPO for the tech division. We're talking about a child, not a corporate scandal." Holden shot back, his voice rising slightly. "June lost her mother. She was living on the streets. What do you suggest I should have done? Ignored her?" The ensuing silence was answer enough. That was precisely what they expected him to have done. Gerald was the first to break the silence. "No one is questioning your compassion, Holden. But there are proper channels for this kind of situation. Charities, social services." "And how much time have you spent in a youth shelter lately, Gerald?" Holden asked, his voice now dangerously calm. "Do any of you have any idea what the system is like for kids like June?" The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Holden knew he had hit a nerve. Most of them lived in a bubble of privilege, just as he had until recently. Margaret Osley shifted in her seat. "The point is that you need to resolve this situation quickly and discreetly." "Resolve? She's not a problem to be solved. She's a person." "No one is suggesting otherwise," Gerald intervened, trying to calm tempers. "But you have responsibilities here, Holden, to this company, to its employees, to its shareholders. Have I been neglecting those responsibilities?" 3 cancelled meetings, Philip responded. "The Singapore project is behind schedule. Next quarter's budget review is still undone." Holden took a deep breath. It was true that his routine had drastically changed since June's arrival. For the first time in years, work wasn't his only priority. "And the donation to social housing," Victoria continued. 2 million without prior consultation. That's not like you, Holden. Indeed it wasn't. Before June, Holden had viewed corporate donations primarily as marketing strategies and tax breaks. Now, after seeing the other side, it felt different. I considered it an important investment, he replied simply. Gerald sighed. Holden, we understand that you're going through something, but the board needs assurances that you're still making decisions with the best interests of the company in mind. And if I can't give those assurances, the question hung in the air like a silent threat. Everyone knew that despite the board's power, Holden still held majority control of the company, an inheritance directly from his father. Then we have a serious problem, Gerald finally said, one none of us wants to face. The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions about ongoing projects and quarterly numbers, but the main topic, June, remained the elephant in the room. When it finally ended, only Gerald stayed behind. Your father built this company from nothing, Holden, the older man said once they were alone. He sacrificed a lot for it, including family time. I'm aware. I just wonder if you understand what you're risking here, for a stranger. Holden met his father's friend's gaze. June isn't a stranger, not anymore. Gerald shook his head. Just be careful. Rumors spread like wildfire, easy to start, hard to contain, and some people on that board don't share my loyalty to the Marshall family. When Holden left the building, the sun was already setting over New York. His phone buzzed with a message from Keena. I found more info on Alessandra Caldwell. Connection to the mansion is confirmed. Let's talk tomorrow. The news should have excited him, but after the board meeting he felt only a heaviness on his shoulders. As he drove home, he thought about Gerald's words. His father had indeed sacrificed a lot for the company, including precious moments with family. Holden had followed that legacy faithfully until now. Arriving at the mansion, he found June in the library, flipping through an old photo book of New York. Brownie, as always, was at her side on the couch. When she saw him, her face lit up with a hesitant smile, something rare that Holden had learned to treasure. Patricia made cookies, June informed him, pointing to a plate on the coffee table. I saved some for you. The simple gesture, so domestic and ordinary, stirred an unexpected emotion in Holden. In just a few weeks, this wary girl had begun to put down roots in his house, his life. Thank you, he said, picking up a cookie. Find anything interesting in the book? As June showed him old photos of the city and asked about places she'd never visited, Holden reflected on how his life had changed in such a short time. The board wanted him to fix the situation, go back to being the executive solely focused on the business. But looking at June, listening to her excitedly describe the places she wanted to see, Holden realized he had already made his decision. Regardless of what Keena might discover about Alessandra Caldwell or how much pressure the board put on him, he would not abandon June. Not the way everyone else in her life had. Holden spent the entire night in his office. The documents Keena had found confirmed that Alessandra Caldwell had indeed worked briefly at the mansion, but that was only part of the story. As he searched for more information about her in the company archives, Holden stumbled upon a folder he had never opened. Social Impact Reports. Marshall Enterprises had a real estate development division that had grown exponentially in recent years. Holden had always seen the projects in terms of numbers, land acquisitions, construction costs, projected profit margins. He'd never cared much about what happened to the former residents of revitalized areas. The first report was dated 5 years ago. Riverside Project, Population Displacement. The pages detailed how the construction of a luxury complex had forced 78 low-income families to relocate. The company had offered minimal compensation, and many families couldn't find affordable housing elsewhere. Holden picked up another file, Harbor Heights, Community Impact Analysis. More dry numbers, more lives disrupted. Then a third, Clinton Neighborhood, Transition Phase. The area where he'd found June. His stomach turned as he read the statistics. 200 families displaced, a shortage of affordable housing, a rise in homelessness in the area. The colorful graphs turned human suffering into antiseptic data, easy to ignore in quarterly results meetings. A map showed the areas most affected by Marshall Enterprises' urban development. With a trembling finger, Holden traced a line between them. Clinton, where he'd found June; Riverside, where the women's shelter Alessandra had last been seen at, was located; Harbor Heights, near the hospital where June had been born. The connection was undeniable. June's and her mother's lives had been directly affected by his company's projects. People like them had been treated as obstacles to progress, problems to remove in the name of profit. "My God," Holden muttered, leaning back in his chair. For years he had signed documents, approved projects, celebrated profits without ever thinking of the real consequences, real people, real lives, like June's, like Alessandra's. Guilt hit him like a punch. Could his own company have contributed to the situation that separated June from her mother? Had Alessandra lost her home because of one of Marshall Enterprises' developments? Holden didn't sleep that night. By the time the sun rose, he had read every social impact report from the last 10 years. The pattern was clear. The company was building wealth literally on the backs of the most vulnerable. At 9 in the morning, his assistant reminded him of the meeting with the Japanese investors from the Tanaka Group. It was a crucial meeting for the Singapore project, an ultra-luxury development promising to be the year's most profitable. Holden arrived at the corporate auditorium 15 minutes early. The board was already there, as were the potential investors. Impeccable slides showcased the benefits of revitalizing the area without mentioning what would happen to current residents. "Good morning, everyone," Holden began the presentation mechanically. His mind was still on the reports he'd spent the night reading, on people like June. The presentation followed the script until the Q&A session. That's when Akira Tanaka, the investors' leader, raised his hand. "Mr. Marshall, we've seen recent reports about your new interest in social projects. Will this affect development in Singapore?" The question dropped like a bomb. The board members fidgeted, throwing warning glances at Holden. This was the time to reassure the investors, to separate business from charity, as Gerald had suggested. But Holden could no longer see that separation. "Actually, Mr. Tanaka, I'm reconsidering several aspects of our projects." Holden heard a collective sigh from the board. "I believe we need to integrate social responsibility into our business model." Victoria Chen tried to intervene. "What Holden means is that we have some parallel corporate social responsibility initiatives, but the Singapore development will proceed as planned." "No, Victoria," Holden interrupted her. "That's not what I mean." He turned to the investors. "Gentlemen, Marshall Enterprises has been very financially successful, but recently I discovered that this success came at a human cost we never properly accounted for." The silence in the room was palpable. Gerald Winters looked on the verge of a heart attack. "Our past developments displaced hundreds of families without providing viable alternatives. We created luxury condos, but we didn't care about those who couldn't afford them." Holden paused. "That needs to change." Akira Tanaka tilted his head, intrigued. "Exactly what are you proposing, Mr. Marshall?" "A revamp of our model. For every future projectee, including Singapore, 20% of the units will be designated for affordable housing. Additionally, we will establish a fund to ensure no family is displaced without a place to go." Philip Greaves, the CFO, practically jumped out of his seat. "That would reduce our profit margin by at least 30%. And it would still remain highly profitable," Holden countered. "Just not obscenely profitable at the expense of vulnerable people." The board members exchanged desperate looks. The Japanese investors whispered among themselves. Surprisingly, it was Akira Tanaka who spoke first. "Interesting approach, Mr. Marshall. In Japan, we have a concept called kyoshi, living and working together for the common good. Perhaps there is merit in your proposal." The meeting ended shortly after, with the investors requesting a revised proposal incorporating the new social responsibility elements. As soon as the Japanese left, the board surrounded Holden. "Have you lost your mind?" Gerald roared, his face red with anger. 30% profit drop. "That will tank our stock price, and maybe save some lives in the process," Holden answered calmly. Victoria shook her head. "It's because of the girl, isn't it? You're letting one isolated case affect business decisions that impact thousands of jobs. It's not an isolated case, Victoria. We should have known that already. Holden handed out copies of the social impact reports. Have you read any of these documents? I never had. And the truth is, we never wanted to. We're a developer, not a charity, Philip insisted. Our duty is to the shareholders. And to the communities we operate in, Holden shot back. From now on, every Marshall Enterprises project will include affordable housing components and community support programs. And no, that's not up for negotiation. The board was stunned. In all the years Holden had been running the company, he'd never so directly challenged immediate financial interests. He had always been the efficient executor of his father's legacy, focused on expansion and profitability. You'll regret this, Gerald warned as the group dispersed. Back in his office, Holden found a message from Keena. I have Elisandra Caldwell's current location, confirmed link to the Riverside project. We need to talk ASAP. Holden's heart raced. They'd finally locate June's mother. But the news now came with an even heavier weight. The realization that his own company might have played a role in their suffering. How would he tell June? How would he explain that the man trying to help her could be the same one who, indirectly, contributed to her situation? For the first time in his professional life, Holden realized he was facing not just a corporate crisis, but a moral one, and the solution to both depended on his courage to keep confronting uncomfortable truths about his company, about his father, and about himself. June was in the hallway when she heard voices coming from Holden's office. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when she heard her name, she couldn't help pausing to listen. That girl is becoming a serious problem, Holden, came the voice of Gerald Winters. June recognized it from the dinner the previous night, when he had stared at her with a cold curiosity. The shareholders are furious about the announcement you made. 30% profit reduction. I didn't come here to rehash the numbers, Holden replied, his voice tense. Then let's discuss what really matters, Gerald continued. This little charity experiment of yours is clouding your judgment. The girl has to go today. June is not an experiment, Holden's voice sounded angry. And she stays. As long as she's here, you'll keep making irrational decisions. Think about your father's legacy, Holden. Everything he built, you're willing to risk it for some stranger who came out of nowhere. June backed away from the door, her heart pounding. A problem. That's what she was, again, as in every temporary home she'd been in over the last 4 years. Always the problem, never the solution, always the burden. In her room, June sat on the bed, hugging Brownie. For a few weeks, she had let herself believe she'd finally found a place to stay, a place where she was wanted. But now she saw the truth. Her presence was causing trouble for Holden, problems with his job, his company, the people who mattered to him. The decision formed quickly. Moving quietly, June grabbed the backpack she'd brought on her first day. She put in some clothes, the small makeup kit Patricia had given her, and the cereal bars she kept in the nightstand. She hesitated when she saw the book Holden had lent her, an old edition of The Secret Garden, but decided to leave it. It wasn't hers, after all. She took one last look at the spacious room, the soft bed, the view of the snow-covered garden. Then she placed Brownie in her backpack, leaving just the bear's head poking out, and slipped out through the back door. 2 hours later, Holden went upstairs to call June for dinner. His conversation with Gerald had left him exhausted and upset, but the prospect of sharing a meal with the girl always lifted his mood. Maybe afterward they could play that board game she liked so much. He knocked softly on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder. June, you all right? Silence. A sudden tightness gripped his chest. He opened the door. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. His first thought was that she might be in another part of the house, the library, maybe, or the kitchen with Patricia. But something in the air, the subtle absence of life, told him otherwise. He opened the closet and immediately noticed the empty spaces where some clothes should be. The backpack was gone. June! Holden ran through the house, calling her name in every room, panic escalating with each empty space he found. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, alarmed. What's wrong, Mr. Marshall? Have you seen June? She's not in her room. The worried look on the housekeeper's face said it all. "I haven't seen her since lunch." "I thought she was with you." Holden checked the security cameras on the property. There she was, a small figure slipping out the back door at 4:38 p.m., almost 2 hours ago. The sight sent a wave of despair through him. "Call Keena," Patricia urged, remaining calm where Holden was unraveling. "I'll check the grounds." Keena picked up on the second ring. As Holden explained, his voice trembled. "You need to calm down," the lawyer said firmly. "Think, where would a 12-year-old go? Does she know the city? I don't know. She used to live on the streets. She could be anywhere." Holden ran his hands through his hair in desperation. "I'm calling the police." "Wait," Keena intervened. "Think about the implications. A public search for June will raise questions about your guardianship. We could face legal issues if the authorities find out you lost her." "I don't care about legal issues. She's out there, alone." "I know. We'll find her. But we need to be discreet. I have contacts, people who can help without involving the authorities officially." An hour later, a small team organized by Keena fanned out to likely spots where June might have gone. Holden insisted on going himself, ignoring Keena's pleas for discretion. She finally relented, giving him a list of shelters and community centers to check. Night fell over New York as Holden drove through the streets, his desperation growing with every fruitless stop. How had he let this happen? Why had she run? The last time he saw her, everything seemed fine. Then he remembered Gerald had been at the mansion. They had argued about June, about business. Had she heard? The thought made his stomach sink. If June had overheard Gerald calling her a problem, saying she had to go. Meanwhile, across the city, June walked the familiar streets of the neighborhood where Holden had found her. The night felt colder than she remembered, or maybe she'd gotten used to the warmth of the mansion. She found a bench in a small park and sat around trying to figure out her next move. The weeks at Holden's house had changed her perspective. Beforehand, she knew every safe nook of the neighborhood, every temporary shelter, every meal distribution time. Surviving on the streets was her only reality. Now, after sleeping in her own bed, eating regular meals, feeling the security of solid walls around her, the streets seemed more hostile, more dangerous. "Just the two of us again, Brownie," she murmured to the teddy bear, tucking it into her coat pocket so it would stay warm. "Like before." But it wasn't like before. Before, she had never met Holden. She'd never known what it was like to have someone truly care about her. She had never read books in a private library, or eaten pancakes made just for her, or fallen asleep without fear. A few hours later, hunger gnawed at her. June headed to a diner she used to frequent, where she'd sometimes get leftover food. But when she arrived, she found it closed down. In its place was a stylish clothing store with mannequins behind lit windows. Yet another place lost to the urban revitalization Holden mentioned so often in his work calls. June felt a pang of bitter irony. Even the streets she knew were no longer the same. With the cold intensifying, she decided to try the community shelter a few blocks away. At least she could spend the night in a heated space, but upon arrival, she found a huge line. "We're full kafir," a woman said. "Try St. Vincent's, 10 blocks from here." Meanwhile, at Keena's office, a crucial discovery was made. The investigator hired to look into Alessandra Caldwell's past had found a hospital record that changed everything. Alessandra Caldwell, admitted on April 5th of 2011 for childbirth. Daughter, June Caldwell. Father not listed. The investigator pointed to another document. And here, record of employment at Marshall Mansion from January to March 2011 as a cleaning staff temp. Keena studied the documents, seeing the connections clearly. Alessandra had worked at the mansion while pregnant. She left shortly before giving birth. The teddy bear, Brownie, had likely been found among items she'd been organizing for donation. "We have to tell Holden right away," Keena decided, picking up the phone. But the call went to voicemail. Holden was still out searching the streets for June. June, too, now huddled under the awning of a closed store, fought off the cold and hunger. Brownie nestled against her chest, her only comfort. She thought about Holden, wondering if he'd realized she was gone yet, if he was angry, if he was looking for her, or if, secretly, He was relieved to be rid of the problem she represented. It was the early hours of the morning when Holden parked in front of the last place on his list, St. Vincent's Youth Shelter. His body ached with fatigue, but desperation kept him going. The past 8 hours had been a blur of unfamiliar faces, dark alleys, and dashed hopes. The shelter was an old red brick building with bars on the windows and a worn-out sign. Nothing like the luxury projects his company built. A line of young people waited at the entrance, hoping for the last available beds that night. Holden walked past the crowd, ignoring suspicious glances. At the reception desk, a middle-aged woman was filling out forms, her face weary. "I'm looking for a girl," Holden explained, showing a photo of June on his phone. 12 years old, dark hair. She carries a brown teddy bear. The woman barely glanced at the picture. "We can't give out information about minors. It's shelter policy." "Please," Holden's voice trembled. "I'm her legal guardian. She ran away today." "Her name?" "June." "June Caldwell." The woman studied him for a long moment, taking in his disheveled appearance and the desperation in his eyes, so different from the polished businessman in the news. "Wait here," she finally said, getting up. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Holden watched the young people entering, some barely older than June, all carrying that same guarded look he recognized in her from their first meeting. The look of someone who learned far too soon that the world rarely offers second chances. The woman returned, accompanied by a tall man in a security uniform. "We need to check your ID," the man said. Policy to protect minors. Holden showed every document he had on him. After a series of phone calls to verify his story, they finally agreed to see if June was at the shelter. "She came in about 2 hours ago," the woman explained, leading him down a narrow hallway. She didn't want to give her full name. Said she was just passing through. They stopped outside a common room where several young people were sitting on worn-out couches, some watching an old TV, others simply staring into space. And there, in a corner by herself, was June. Sitting alone, Brownie clutched tightly in her arms, gazing out the window. 5 minutes, the woman warned. "If she doesn't want to go with you, we'll have to follow protocol and contact social services." Holden nodded, unable to take his eyes off June. He approached cautiously, afraid of scaring her. When he was just a few steps away, she turned her head. For a brief second, he saw something in her eyes, relief maybe, quickly replaced by a neutral, almost defensive expression. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice small in the silent space. "I looked everywhere," Holden answered simply, sitting down beside her. "Why did you run, June?" She looked away, hugging Brownie even tighter. "I heard you and that man talking. I know I'm a problem for you, for your company." Holden closed his eyes, guilt hitting him hard. "You heard Gerald, not me." "But it's true, isn't it? Ever since I moved in with you, everything got complicated. Your work, your friends, everything." Holden hesitated. June had always been direct. She wouldn't accept half-truths or evasive answers. She deserved honesty now. "Yes, some things have become more complicated," he admitted. "But you know what else happened? For the first time in years, the mansion feels like a home. Coming back actually means something other than just ending a work day." June looked at him skeptically. "You don't have to say that just to make me go back." "I'm not saying it to make you go back. I'm saying it because it's the truth." Holden took a deep breath. "June, I spent the last 8 hours searching every corner of this city for you. Do you know why?" She shook her head slightly. "Because I care about you. Because the idea of you being alone out here again," his voice faltered, "I can't bear it." Something about the raw sincerity in Holden's voice seemed to reach June. Tears filled her eyes, which she tried desperately to blink away. "Everyone ends up leaving me," she murmured, voice trembling. "My mum, the foster families, everyone. I thought it'd be easier if I left first, before you kicked me out." "I'm not kicking you out, June. How can I believe that? How can I know that tomorrow you won't change your mind? Or that your board won't force you to choose between me and your company?" The questions hovered between them, weighted with all the disappointments June had faced in her short life. Holden had no easy answers. He couldn't promise everything would be perfect, or that they wouldn't face more difficulties. I can't guarantee the future, June. Nobody can. But I can promise that as far as it depends on me, you have a home. And if I have to choose between you and the company, well, he gave a slight smile. Let's just say the board isn't too happy with me anyway lately. June finally let the tears fall. I'm so scared, she whispered, of trusting. Of believing it could be different this time. Without thinking, Holden reached out his hand. June hesitated for a moment before placing hers in his. It was the first time they'd touched like that. A simple gesture of connection that spoke more than words. I'm scared too, June. I've never taken care of anyone but myself. I'll probably make mistakes. A lot of them. He squeezed her small hand gently. But I promise to try, every day. The silence that followed was no longer tense, but contemplative. June glanced at Brownie, then back at Holden. Can I go home? She finally asked, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear. Home. The word resonated between them, full of meaning. Yes, Holden answered, feeling a lump in his throat. Let's go home. As they left the shelter, June stuck close to Holden, not holding his hand anymore, but walking beside him with a new, hesitant confidence. In the car, she spoke little, watching the city lights through the window. Brownie held firmly in her lap. That man, Gerald, she said suddenly. Will he be mad you brought me back? Probably, but Gerald doesn't live in our house, does he? A small smile appeared on June's lips. No. When they reached the mansion, Patricia was waiting at the door, obvious relief on her face when she saw June. Without a word, she gave the girl a brief hug before announcing she had made hot chocolate. June went upstairs to change clothes while Holden called Keena to say he'd found her. The lawyer didn't hide her relief. Holden, she said, her voice oddly hesitant. There's something else. We found Alessandra Caldwell. Holden's heart pounded. Are you sure? Positive. The investigator confirmed it. She's living in Queens, in a low-income housing complex. And Holden, she worked at the mansion in 2011, just before June was born. The records confirm it. The revelation hung between them, all the puzzle pieces finally in place. Does she know we've found June? Not yet. I thought I should talk to you first. Holden looked toward the stairs, thinking about June. The girl had just come back. Their trust was still fragile as glass. How would she react to hearing they had found her mother, the woman who had abandoned her 4 years ago? Let's meet tomorrow, Holden decided. We need to figure out how to handle this in the least traumatic way possible for June. When he hung up, he found June standing at the foot of the stairs, already in pajamas, Brownie in her arms as usual. There was something different in her expression, a look of determination mixed with vulnerability. Who was on the phone? She asked. Keena. She just wanted to check if you were all right. June nodded, clearly not fully believing him. But she didn't press. Together they headed to the kitchen where Patricia had set out hot chocolate and cookies, a simple domestic scene that, just a few weeks earlier, would have seemed impossible in the Marshall mansion. Thank you for coming to get me, June said softly after they finished the hot chocolate. Always, Holden replied. And he realized, with some surprise, that he really meant it. Holden spent another sleepless night, wrestling with how to tell June they had found her mother. Fear of her reaction gnawed at him. What if June wanted to leave immediately? What if, after learning her mother hadn't abandoned her on purpose, June decided she no longer needed him? These selfish thoughts made him feel guilty. He shouldn't be worried about himself, but about what was best for June, even if that meant losing her. Early the next morning, Keena arrived, carrying a folder with all the information on Alessandra Caldwell. She's living in a women's shelter in the Bronx, Keena said over breakfast. June was still asleep, exhausted from the previous day's events. The conditions are pretty dire. She works as a cleaner during the day, but her wages barely cover the basics. She's been at the shelter for about 8 months. How did she react when you told her about June? I wanted to talk to you first. Figure out the approach. Keena hesitated. Holden, you need to understand something. Legally, Alessandra has rights over June, even living in a shelter, if she proves she's seeking stability and that the separation wasn't intentional neglect. I know, Holden cut in, his voice betraying his mixed emotions. He'd feared this moment ever since they started searching for Alessandra. But we can't hide this from June. Agreed. The question is how and when to tell her. The decision was taken out of their hands when June's voice sounded from the doorway. Tell me what? Holden and Keena turned, startled. June stood in the doorway in her pajamas, Brownie clutched in her arms, her eyes flicked between them, ever perceptive. It's about my mother, isn't it? She said, walking over to the table. You found her. It wasn't a question. Holden nodded slowly. Yes, we did. June sat down, her fingers nervously gripping the teddy bear. Where is she? Does she want to see me? She doesn't know we've found you, Keena explained gently. We wanted to talk to you first. A tense silence settled over the kitchen. June seemed to process the information, her face revealing a turmoil of emotions. She left me, June finally said, her voice small. There might be more to the story, Holden suggested softly. We don't know what really happened. June stared at Brownie for a long moment. I want to see her, she decided, looking up. There was determination in her eyes, but also fear. But you'll go with me, right? She asked Holden. Of course, he answered immediately, if that's what you want. I can set up a meeting for tomorrow, Keena offered. There's a quiet cafe halfway between here and the Bronx. It'll be a neutral place. The arrangements were made in a matter of hours. Keena personally visited the shelter to inform Alessandra about June, preferring to do it face-to-face rather than over the phone. When she returned to the mansion that afternoon, her expression was serious. She broke down when I showed her June's photo, Keena reported. Said she never stopped looking for her, even without resources or help. It was moving to see her reaction. She agreed to meet at Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m. The rest of the day passed in nervous tension. June swung between moments of excitement and stretches of introspective silence. After dinner, as Holden worked on some documents in his office, she appeared at the door. What if she doesn't like me? She asked abruptly. Holden set the papers aside. June, she's your mum. Of course she's going to like you. But I'm different now. I've grown. What if I'm not what she expects? Her eyes revealed a vulnerability she rarely showed. What if she doesn't want me back? June, come here. Holden gestured for her to join him on the couch. Once she sat, he continued, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I can't promise it'll be easy or that all your questions will be answered, but I promise I'll be there with you, no matter what. June nodded, taking in his words. Thanks, she said simply, before leaving the office quietly. Holden stayed up late, thinking about the possible revelations the next day might bring. The fact that Alessandra had worked at the mansion was more than a coincidence. It was a direct link between his past and June's. What else would they discover? The next morning, the drive to the cafe was silent. June wore a simple dress Patricia had helped her choose, and Brownie, as always, was with her. Holden noticed how she nervously adjusted her hair every few minutes. Riverside Cafe was modest, with wooden tables and large windows offering a view of the river. Keena was already there, seated at a quieter table in the back. She's already here, Keena said quietly as they approached. Arrived 20 minutes early. Holden followed Keena's gaze to a woman sitting alone by the window. Alessandra Caldwell looked much older than her 30-something years. Though her face bore deep lines of worry and fatigue, it clearly shared features with June. The same expressive eyes, the same face shape. Her clothes were simple, visibly worn but clean, and her hands twisted nervously on the table. June stopped when she saw her, gripping Holden's hand tightly. It's her, she whispered, a mixture of recognition and shock in her voice. When Alessandra looked up and saw June, her face transformed. Tears sprang immediately to her eyes, and she stood, unsteady. June, she said, her voice nearly inaudible. For a moment, no one moved. Then June let go of Holden's hand and walked slowly toward her mother. When they were only a couple of steps apart, Alessandra opened her arms. June hesitated just for a second before throwing herself into the embrace. Alessandra's arms wrapped around her tightly, as if she feared June might disappear again. Both were crying, words jumbled together with sobs. Holden watched the scene with a lump in his throat, feeling at once like an intruder and a participant in something profoundly significant. After a few minutes, they finally parted, though Alessandra kept June's hand firmly in hers. She looked at Holden, tears still in her grateful eyes. "You took care of her," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "She took care of me, too," Holden replied, making June smile through her tears. The four of them sat at the table. For a moment, no one knew what to say, the gravity of the moment hanging in the air. It was June who broke the silence, lifting Brownie. "Do you remember him?" she asked her mother. Alessandra smiled, gently touching the teddy bear. "Of course I do. You've been inseparable since you were a baby." She looked at Holden. "I never imagined he would lead us here." "How did you get it?" Holden asked, finally voicing the question that had plagued him for weeks. Alessandra took a deep breath, preparing to tell her story. "I worked in your house for a few months, 12 years ago. I was 5 months pregnant when I got the temporary job. Your mother, Mrs. Marshall, hired me to organize old items in the attic, decide what could be donated or thrown away." Holden nodded. He vaguely remembered that time, when his mother decided to reorganize the mansion after his father's death. "One day, I found a box of your childhood belongings, clothes, books, toys. Among them was the teddy bear." Alessandra's smile was tinged with sadness. "Your mother said it was your favorite when you were young, but you'd outgrown it. It was in the pile of items to be donated." June looked at Brownie, then at Holden, finally comprehending. "Mrs. Marshall noticed me admiring the teddy bear," Alessandra went on. "She asked about my pregnancy, if I'd bought anything for the baby yet. When I admitted I could barely afford rent, she told me I could keep it." Her eyes filled with tears again. "It was the first gift June ever received." "Then what happened?" Kina asked gently. Alessandra's face twisted in pain. "As the pregnancy progressed, it got harder to do the job. The hours were long, and the tasks were physically demanding. One afternoon, I nearly fainted in the attic. The butler, I don't remember his name, said I wasn't fit to work anymore. I was fired a week later." Holden felt a heaviness in his stomach. This had happened under his roof, and he, immersed in his own life, had had no idea. "Without a job, I couldn't pay the rent. We moved several times in the following years, each apartment smaller and worse than the last." Alessandra looked at June with sorrow. I swear I tried to give you a better life. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, but it was never enough." June squeezed her mother's hand, silently encouraging her. "When the housing crisis hit our neighborhood, we were evicted. Ironically, it was a Marshall Enterprises project that demolished our building," Alessandra said, glancing at Holden without accusation, merely stating a fact. "We ended up in shelters for a while, then on the streets. That's when—" Her voice broke. "When you left me at the shelter," June finished for her. Alessandra nodded, tears streaming freely. "I got a job interview in Jersey. It was my only shot at stable work with benefits. The shelter wouldn't let children stay unsupervised, so I arranged with a social worker. You'd stay there for 3 days, until I got back." "But you didn't come back," June muttered, her old hurt evident. "I did come back," Alessandra corrected, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I came on the 4th day with a job offer in hand, but you'd run away the night before. I searched everywhere for you, June, every shelter, every street we knew. For 4 years, I never stopped looking." She paused, wiping her tears. "The job didn't work out. The supervisor wanted more than work. When I refused, I was fired. After that, everything fell apart for good. I lost our last apartment. I lost you. I ended up on the streets, then in shelters. I've been at the Santa Maria Center for 8 months now, trying to save enough money for a place, but—" She gestured at her threadbare clothes, the exhaustion etched in her face. "It's hard to start over when you've got nothing." The silence that followed was thick with pain and regret. June stared at Brownie, processing everything she'd heard. Holden watched mother and daughter, realizing how their lives had been shaped by decisions made on his behalf, under his roof by his company. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words feeling woefully inadequate in the face of all the suffering he had indirectly helped cause. "For what happened at the mansion, for the eviction, I didn't know, but that's no excuse." Alessandra studied him for a long moment. I don't blame you, Mr. Marshall. You didn't know me. You didn't even know I existed until a few weeks ago. But now I do, Holden replied, determination in his voice, and I can do something about it. The hours that followed passed quickly as mother and daughter reconnected, sharing stories of the lost years. Holden and Kina stayed quietly on the periphery, allowing June and Alessandra to have their moment, but offering silent support. When they finally parted, promising to meet again the next day, June hugged her mother for a long time. "You'll really come back?" she asked, old insecurities creeping in. "Always," Alessandra promised. "I'm never leaving you again, June." On the ride back to the mansion, June remained quiet, digesting everything she had discovered. Brownie rested on her lap, but this time she held him differently, not with desperation, but with a new understanding of what he represented. "You okay?" Holden finally asked, concerned about her silence. June nodded slowly. "I think so." She glanced at him. "What about you?" The question surprised him. Amid all the emotional turbulence, June was still worried about his feelings. "I'm processing a lot," he admitted honestly. "Learning my family indirectly caused you both so much suffering." "It wasn't you," June said firmly, "and you're trying to fix things now." Holden smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm trying." Both of them knew, though they didn't say it, that the inevitable question hung in the air. What now? Alessandra clearly wanted her daughter back, but her living conditions were far from ideal. June had rediscovered the mother she thought had abandoned her. And Holden, was he prepared to let June go if that was best for her? The mansion, which had become a home in recent weeks, suddenly felt transient, as if they were all just waiting for the real conclusion to this story that began with a teddy bear named Brownie. The morning after meeting Alessandra, Holden woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Overnight, an idea had taken shape in his mind, not just a temporary solution, but a true path forward for everyone involved. Sitting in his office, he drafted the contours of his idea when Kina arrived for their scheduled meeting. "You look determined," she noted, taking a seat across from him. "I am," Holden responded, sliding a preliminary document toward her. "I want to start a foundation, the Marshall Foundation for Housing and Social Reintegration." Kina picked up the document, eyebrows raised. "This goes beyond just helping Alessandra and June." "Exactly. I've been thinking about this ever since I learned how our real estate projects hurt so many lives. Helping just one family when hundreds were affected isn't enough. The plan was ambitious. The foundation would offer temporary housing to families displaced by urban development projects, along with job training and reintegration assistance. Holden would commit an initial $25 million of his personal assets, and Marshall Enterprises would allocate 5% of its annual profits to sustain the operation. "The board is going to have a meltdown," Kina remarked, flipping through the document. "First you announce a reduction in our profit margins. Now you want to commit 5% of earnings." "Let me handle the board," Holden said with a slight smile. "This is what I want to discuss with you. I need someone to run this foundation, someone who truly understands what these families are going through." Kina studied him, immediately guessing. "Alessandra." "Yes. I want to offer her the role of community programs coordinator and a decent apartment where she and June can live. What if June wants to stay with you? Have you considered that possibility?" The question cut straight to Holden's heart. Yes, he'd considered it, more than he cared to admit. The thought of June leaving the mansion caused a surprising pang. "That will be up to her," he finally answered. "And Alessandra. They need to rebuild their relationship, and I don't want to interfere with that." Kina looked at her friend for a moment. "You really have changed, Holden." "I hope so," he replied softly, "for the better." Within days, Kina had all the paperwork ready to establish the foundation. Alessandra was invited to a meeting at the mansion without knowing precisely what to expect. June greeted her at the door, more excited than Holden had seen her in weeks. The two seemed to have found their own rhythm already, still cautious, but with moments of genuine connection that warmed and pained Holden at the same time. In the office, Holden laid out his proposal for Alessandra, whose eyes grew wider with every detail about the foundation and her prospective role. I don't understand, she said after he finished. Why me? I don't have any qualifications to manage something like this. I don't even have a college degree. You have something far more valuable, Holden said. Lived experience. You know these families' struggles because you've been there. You know what works and what doesn't in support systems because you depended on them. No degree can teach that. Alessandra looked at June, who listened intently to the conversation. And where would we stay? Me and June. There's an apartment in the building where the foundation will operate, 3 bedrooms fully furnished. It'd be part of your compensation, along with a salary and benefits. We could be together again. Alessandra's voice trembled slightly as she looked at her daughter. That's the idea, Kina confirmed. We're preparing the paperwork to regularize June's situation. Legally, you never lost custody. You were just separated by circumstances. A heavy silence fell over the room. They all knew what that meant. June would leave the mansion, would leave Holden. Or, Holden added, struggling to keep his voice steady, we can consider other arrangements if June prefers to stay here for now. The important thing is that you two can rebuild your relationship at a pace that works for both of you. June looked at him, then at her mother, conflict clear on her face. Can I think about it? Of course, they both answered at the same time. Meanwhile, at Marshall Enterprises' main office, news of the foundation had already leaked to the board. Gerald Winters called an emergency meeting where Holden formally presented the project. This is madness, Holden, Gerald argued, slamming the table. First you slash our profit margins, now you want to divert 5% of our revenues to charity. The shareholders will crucify us. It's not charity, it's social investment, Holden replied calmly, and I suggest we look at the numbers before declaring doomsday. Victoria Chen, who had been silent so far, spoke up. I've actually looked at some preliminary projections. If we manage it properly, the positive PR could significantly boost our brand value. Exactly, Holden agreed. Besides, we're rectifying damage our own company caused. It's not only morally right, it's strategically smart. To Holden's surprise, Margaret Osley, typically the most conservative member, cleared her throat. I have to admit, since we announced our new social commitments, I've received several inquiries from ESG-focused investors. Seems there's a growing market for companies with genuine social responsibility. Gerald looked around, realizing he was losing support. Who's going to run this foundation? I already have someone in mind, Holden answered. Someone with direct experience of the issues we're addressing. The meeting concluded without a final resolution, but Holden knew he'd gained ground. Back at home, he found June sitting on the front steps with Brownie at her side. Thinking, he asked, sitting next to her. June nodded. I want to be with my mom, she said plainly. I missed her every single day of these past years. Holden felt a tightening in his chest, but kept his expression calm. I completely understand. It's the right thing. But I don't want to leave you either, June continued, her voice betraying her confusion. It's weird. I've never had 2 people before. Holden smiled, fighting back emotion. It doesn't have to be a final choice, June. We can find a middle ground. The apartment isn't far from here. You can come over anytime, stay for dinner, spend weekends. Like divorced families do. Something like that? Yes. June thought about it for a moment. I think that could work, she said finally. But are you sure you won't mind? That you won't forget me when I'm not here every day. The question was so honest, so vulnerable, that Holden had to take a deep breath before answering. June, how could I forget you? You've changed my life completely. Besides, he added with a grin, we still have a mystery to solve. What mystery? Brownie, of course. We need to figure out how 2 identical teddy bears ended up in our lives. June smiled, hugging the teddy. Maybe it's just fate. Maybe, Holden agreed. Or maybe it's something else. Something we'll discover together. The following week, Alessandra formally accepted Holden's proposal. Kina oversaw all the legal documentation, ensuring everything was in order. The apartment was quickly set up, simple but comfortable. Just a 15-minute drive from the mansion. June began splitting her time between both homes. During the week, She stayed with her mother, helping her settle into her new job and apartment. On weekends, she returned to the mansion where Holden awaited her with new books and games. The arrangement wasn't perfect. There were tough moments, doubts and adjustments. Alessandra occasionally felt insecure, afraid she couldn't live up to the opportunity she'd been given. June sometimes got lost between the two worlds, unsure where she truly belonged. Holden struggled with the emptiness when the mansion fell silent during the week. But there were also moments of unexpected joy, like when Alessandra first visited the mansion as a guest, not as an employee, and she and Patricia recognized each other from years ago. Or when Holden showed up unannounced at the new apartment with pizza and ice cream for an impromptu movie night. Or when June surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to volunteer part-time at the foundation to help other kids like me. One afternoon, while working together at the newly established foundation's office, Holden watched Alessandra organize files with the same diligence she'd shown years ago in the mansion's attic. Except now, instead of discarding the past, she was helping build a future. "You know what still amazes me," she said, noticing his gaze, "that all this started with a teddy bear." Holden smiled, thinking of Brownie, now shuttling between two homes, just like June. "I guess we'll never fully grasp how small choices can change so many lives." "Like letting a pregnant employee take an old toy home," Alessandra agreed. "Or stopping on a cold night to help a girl in an alley," Holden added. That same day, when he returned to the office, Holden found a notice on his desk. The Singapore project had been approved by the Japanese investors on the condition that the social housing elements he had proposed were included. The first major Marshall Enterprises project under the new corporate philosophy was officially underway. Gerald burst into his office without knocking. "I have to admit, I didn't think it would work," he said bluntly. "But the initial projections for Singapore are surprisingly positive. Because it's possible to do good and do good business at the same time, Gerald," Holden replied. "We just have to care enough to try." The skeptical look on his father's old friend's face didn't vanish entirely, but there was a newfound respect there. "Your father would be proud," Gerald finally said. "Not of how you're doing it, but that you're standing up for your convictions. He always admired that, even when he disagreed." After Gerald left, Holden remained in his chair, gazing out the window at the city where he had grown up, built his empire, found June. The same city that housed countless stories like Alessandra's, people affected by decisions made in offices like this one. His phone vibrated with a text from June. "I found more old mansion documents. I think I discovered something about Brownie. I'll tell you at dinner tonight." Smiling, Holden put the phone away. New chapters of this story were still being written, and for the first time in a long time, he was genuinely eager to see what came next. A spring sun bathed the gardens of the Marshall Mansion, where white tables were arranged in semicircles under blossoming trees. Children ran across the lawn, their laughter echoing through a space that for so many years had known only silence. Adults chatted in small groups, cups of lemonade in hand, their faces marked by difficult histories but lit by renewed hope. From the veranda, Holden watched the scene with a sense of fulfillment no multi-million-dollar deal had ever given him. 6 months had passed since the launch of the Marshall Foundation for Housing and Social Reintegration. 6 months of intense work, unexpected challenges, and rewards that couldn't be measured in dollars. "Impressive, isn't it?" Keena joined him on the veranda, a tablet in hand. 42 families assisted so far. 17 already in permanent housing, 25 in temporary accommodation while they get on their feet. And it's not just housing, jobs, education, healthcare. Holden nodded, his eyes automatically seeking June among the children. He spotted her near the fountain, animatedly explaining something to 2 younger girls. Brownie, as always, was with her, now in a small backpack on her shoulders. "Credit goes to Alessandra," he replied. "She understands these families' needs better than anyone." It was true. Alessandra had proved to be an exceptional manager, turning her life experience into valuable insights for helping vulnerable people. What began as a symbolic position quickly became a central role in the foundation. Speaking of her, Keena pointed to the garden entrance where Alessandra was arriving with more lemonade. Her face, once marked by extreme exhaustion, now looked healthy. Though it still bore traces of past hardships, it also reflected the confidence of someone who had finally found her place in the world. The garden party celebrated 6 months of the foundation's operations, but it also marked another important milestone, 6 months since June and Alessandra had been reunited. Half a year of healing, adjustments, and rediscovery. "How are things with the three of you?" asked Kina, always direct. Holden smiled. The arrangement they'd found was unconventional but worked surprisingly well. June spent most weekdays with her mother in their apartment, but Thursday nights and weekends were reserved for the mansion. Holden dined with them at least once a week at the apartment, and Alessandra often brought June over unannounced when she knew Holden was having a particularly tough day at work. "Better than I ever imagined," he answered honestly. "I think we all found something we needed." June spotted Holden on the veranda and waved enthusiastically. He waved back, feeling that familiar tightness in his chest her presence always caused. There were moments, like now, when he could hardly believe the transformation one child had brought to his life. The Marshall mansion, once a symbol of isolation and coldness, had become a place alive with people. Holden's office now served as a planning center for social projects. The dining room, which rarely saw more than 2 people at a table, often hosted community meetings. Even the attic, where it all began when Alessandra found the original teddy bear, had been converted into a storage space for donated items for the families they assisted. Patricia emerged from the house carrying a large cake. "Everyone gather around, please," she announced. "It's time for cake." The children rushed to the main table, June at the front. Once everyone was assembled, Holden joined them, standing discreetly at the edge of the circle. Alessandra lit the candles, not 6, but 12. One for each month, since the idea for the foundation had begun forming in Holden's mind, right after he found June that cold night. "Before we sing," Alessandra said, her voice firm but full of emotion, "I'd like to say a few words." She paused, looking around at the attentive faces. "A year ago, I was living in a shelter, hopeless about finding my daughter, hopeless about finding a better life. Most of you have similar stories: loss, displacement, hardships that seemed impossible to overcome." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Holden noticed several people discreetly wiping away tears. "Today, we're here not just to celebrate a foundation, but to celebrate proof that new beginnings are possible." Alessandra caught Holden's eye. That one single decision to stop and help someone can spark changes that affect hundreds of lives. June, standing beside her mother, held Brownie against her chest. Her eyes, once always on alert and suspicious, now shone with a steady confidence. In the past months, she had flourished in ways that surprised everyone. The private school she attended, originally chosen for its proximity to both the mansion and the apartment, had become a source of real growth. June Dollars, who had never had consistent schooling, soaked up knowledge with impressive eagerness. Her teachers frequently commented on her sharp intelligence and keen insight. More importantly, June had finally allowed herself to be a child. The nightmares that once plagued her nights had almost disappeared. She laughed openly, made friends, played without fear. She still carried Brownie, but not as a shield against abandonment. Now he was a companion in her adventures, a link to a story she'd learned to accept. After everyone sang happy anniversary and the cake was cut, Holden sat on a bench away from the crowd, watching the celebration. Gerald Winters approached, surprisingly present at a foundation event. "I have to admit, Holden, you proved me wrong," the older man said, taking a seat beside him. "The company's stock has risen 12% since we announced the social housing initiative. Even those grumpy shareholders are satisfied." Holden smiled. Gerald might never fully grasp that the real value wasn't in the numbers, but gaining his allyship had been important. "And those Japanese investors," Gerald went on, "they're so impressed with our business with purpose approach, they want to expand the partnership into 3 new markets." "Glad to hear it," Holden answered. But his gaze remained on June, now teaching a clapping game to a group of kids. Gerald followed his line of sight. "She changed you," he observed, without the accusatory tone he once had. "She saved me," Holden corrected simply. The party lasted until dusk. When the last families left, only Holden, June, and Alessandra remained in the garden, picking up disposable cups and napkins under the warm glow of decorative lanterns. "It was a perfect day," June said, carefully packing leftover cake into plastic containers. "Everyone looked so happy. And this is just the beginning," Alessandra replied. "The foundation has enough projects lined up for the next 2 years at least." June nodded thoughtfully. "I think Brownie is proud of us," she said suddenly, looking at the teddy resting on a nearby chair. "For turning something sad into something good." Holden and Alessandra exchanged smiles. June's occasional wisdom still caught them by surprise. "Speaking of Brownie," Holden said, "I have something to show you both." He led them to the attic, now clean and organized, unlike the dusty space where Alessandra once worked. In a corner, a small table displayed an item under a glass dome. "I found it at the bottom of an old trunk," he explained, removing the dome. "I think it answers some of our questions." It was a slim hand-bound book. On the cover, in childish lettering, it read, "The Story of Brownie" by Elizabeth Marshall. "Elizabeth?" June asked. "Who's that?" "My mother," Holden replied, carefully opening the book. "Apparently, when she was a girl, she created this illustrated story about a magic teddy bear that had the power to bring together people who needed each other. The pages were filled with simple yet charming drawings of a brown teddy bear helping lonely children find friends and family." "The last drawing," Alessandra murmured, flipping to the final page. There, in colored pencil, were not one but 2 identical teddy bears holding hands with a small child. "The twin guardians," Holden read the caption his mother had written decades ago. "Created so no one would ever be alone." June placed Brownie beside the book. "So it wasn't a coincidence," she said with a smile. "Your mother made 2 identical bears on purpose. And somehow one found its way to you," Holden added. "How could she have known?" Alessandra asked, gently touching the page. "I don't think she did," Holden answered. "But I like to think that, somehow, she hoped it might happen, that the bears would one day fulfill their purpose." The 3 stood in silence, contemplating the book and all it represented, the coincidences that weren't coincidences, the intersecting paths, the lives transformed. Later that night, when June was asleep in the bedroom she now considered hers at the mansion, Holden and Alessandra sat on the veranda, gazing at the starry sky. "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Alessandra asked. "If you'd just walked by like so many others did?" Holden considered. "I'd still be the same man, living in the same empty mansion, running the same company without understanding the impact of my decisions." He paused. "And you?" "I would have kept searching for her," Alessandra said firmly. "Every day, in every shelter, in every corner. I would never give up." "Like a circular story," Holden mused. "June looking for you, you looking for June, both lost because of decisions that somehow involved me, and both found for the same reason," Alessandra concluded. Upstairs, June slept cuddling Brownie. In her dream, there were no dark alleys or overcrowded shelters, only sunlit gardens and children's laughter. A summer dream, no longer haunted by the winter cold or the fear of being left behind. The mansion, once a lonely monument to material success, now hummed with the life June had brought in her worn teddy bear. And in the city streets, other children like her found new beginnings, thanks to the unlikely story of a teddy bear that, against all odds, fulfilled its purpose, bringing together people who needed each other. Transformations rarely happen as we expect. Sometimes they begin on cold nights with impulsive decisions and end on warm spring afternoons, when we finally understand that family is less about where we're born and more about who we choose to love.